Hello and welcome to Tamriel. We're running around in the Elder Scrolls Online, and today I want to talk about the difference between a generic lore and a extremely specific lore. Lord of the Rings Online is a good example of a game with very specific lore. It's a specific world. It's a established story that you are living in. Everyone knows from the movies, from the books, what the Lord of the Rings is all about. We know about Mordor, we know about hobbits in the Shire. We have a very specific understanding of what Tolkien's Lord of the Rings really is about. And along with that knowledge comes a box, if you will. There's only certain things you can do in that box because you're constrained by the knowledge of what the lore denotes, what that one story and its storyline is all about. That's fine if you're in the mood to immerse yourself in Tolkien. It's fun to play The Lord of the Rings online while listening to an audiobook of Tolkien or watching the Lord of the Rings movies on a second screen. I could say the same thing about a game like Star Wars Online or Star Trek Online. Rather, Star Wars The Old Republic. I should digress. In any case, all of those are games about specific stories that we already know about. And on the surface, that's great, but it can be a box that's rather constraining for an MMO. I think Elder Scrolls Online does a good job of having a depth of lore. If you want to understand more about what makes the land of Tamriel unique and special, there is so much lore in the Elder Scrolls universe that you really could study it for quite a long time and never run out of content. And yet, it's also largely generic video game fantasy. It's exactly the sort of fantasy that you would expect to find in a virtual online world such as ESO is. And most of the story of the Elder Scrolls is not so much a linear story with a beginning and a middle and an end, as much as it is contextual story. The kind of stories that just add to your sense of knowledge about what the world you're living in is. The dynamics of the world, to make it feel alive, to make it feel lived in, to make it feel like it is a world with history that's relevant and deep. But at the same time, it also gives you room to make of it whatever you wish. You can tell your own story in ESO because there really isn't any overarching story that's already been defined and written, and you're just sort of there in the background. It really is yours to make of it what you will. And I think that that's better. Overall, it helps eliminate that sense of limitation and burnout, which comes from feeling like maybe you don't want to be immersed in that one specifically unique fantasy story like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or Star Trek. I like all of those things, don't get me wrong. Like, I remember watching The Lord of the Rings and watching Star Wars back in the day and Star Trek and thinking, these are worlds, I wish I could be part of them and I want to live in those worlds. And I wish there was another movie because I've watched the last one and there's nothing more to watch and I want to be there. And yet I like a lot of different things. I don't want to define my entire experience by just one awesome fantasy story. I want to be a fan of The Lord of the Rings, and a fan of Star Wars, and a fan of Star Trek. But that doesn't necessarily mean that every single day when I play an MMO, I want to log in and be immersed in that lore. I'd much rather have something that's more generic, so that I can enjoy the world I'm playing in, but I can feel like I'm telling my own story instead of just being in the background of a story that's already been written. Imagination is an important part of the MMO experience, and I think lore is important in the sense that you should be able to have a sense of knowing what the world you're in is all about. Some games fail at this because they don't really have any lore, or it's so shallow. You can just tell, like 6 months ago, someone decided that they're going to make this game. And of course, a game has to have lore, so they made some lore, just because that's what you have to do. And it doesn't mean anything. If you've ever seen an advertisement for Raid Shadow Legends, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about zero effort to create something that anyone's going to care about or remember down the road. Just because it's a video game, and the video game has to have a bad guy, and it has to have lore, and it has to have a world with some kind of a name. Nobody wants to play a game like that long term, because you can tell it's totally fake. There's nothing special about it. That's not the kind of a world that Elder Scrolls is. Elder Scrolls has been being worked on and developed for a very long time. We're talking probably 25 years of effort that's gone into creating the lore of the Elder Scrolls. And yet, most of that is all about just adding on to the sense that Tamriel is a place that's real. Not necessarily telling players how the story ends, because it was designed to be a world first and a story second. And that's the difference between something like Lord of the Rings, or Star Wars, or Star Trek, and the world of Elder Scrolls. All things considered, I think it contributes to a really positive experience, and also an experience you're less likely to burn out on. You're less likely to just get tired of it because you think, well, I like Lord of the Rings, but I don't need to log in every single day for the next few years of my life, however long I play this game, to kill more orcs. I think generic quality lore is better than very specific story-based lore for an MMO. And I think that's a strong point that ESO has. So, one reason, if I was going to say, among many, why ESO might be a good game to pick up would be that you can play the game and you can feel immersed in a world without feeling obligated to attach yourself and box yourself in to one specific franchise, one specific story at the expense of all others. I don't feel like there's any reason why I couldn't just enjoy watching some other fantasy themed movie or something while I'm playing ESO. It's a nice world to be part of. It's a nice community to be part of. And what you make of it is whatever you wish. You can quest, you can do stories, you can skip the quests and just harvest crabs on the beach if that's what you want to do. And all in all, it's a pretty good game, I would say. I am still leaning toward the consensus that Elder Scrolls Online is probably the overall best MMO that I have played up to this point. Not to say that there aren't other games that do a better job at something, but I don't know that I've encountered any games that overall do a better job across the board in general than ESO. So I would recommend it as something to give a try, give it a fair shot, and say what you think about it if you haven't played ESO yet. In any case, thank you very much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.